So I hope you're enjoying the series that we've been in. We've been in a series called The Better Life. This idea, this concept of a better life is central to the heart of what Risen Church is. Our vision statement as a church looks something like this, that the gospel is actually an open invitation to all people to a better life with Jesus. And so we exist for that reason, to invite people to a better life with Jesus. We're an inviting culture. We believe in the nature of invitation. Actually, all of you are here today because somebody invited you, right? Even if it was a complete stranger or a robot who invited you on Facebook, if that's how you heard about us, you were invited and that's how you showed up and that's how the gospel works. And so we invite you to participate at that level as soon as you get here. You know, you could come today, this is your first day ever, and next Sunday you could come and invite somebody to come with you. You could say, I'm going back to this crazy experience that I had at the movie theater. Thought I was going to see a Drew Barrymore movie, and I didn't. That didn't happen, but we had church, and it was a lot of fun. Maybe you should come and check it out with me next week. We invite you to do that, and so that's why every Sunday that you come to Risen, you're given a little business card that on the back of it has our service times. So find somebody that you could bring with you next week and experience this with friends. Life is better with friends. So in the series, the first couple of weeks, we started these talks on day one of our church 2 weeks ago, and talked about this idea that God loves us at our worst. Loves us in our sin, in our messed up nature, everything that's broken about us. He loves us there. And that's ridiculous. That was kind of the nature of that message, was to explore the idea of how ridiculous that is. Right? That a lot of people have kind of developed this opinion and expectation of Christianity that this is all about what we do because we're afraid of what God will do to us if we don't. Well, that's not how the gospel works at all. It's not what the Bible says is true. The Bible says that God actually loves you in your sin and invites you to trust Him. That is the nature of this message. That's the difference of from Christianity to just about every religion I've ever heard of. It's not God is mad at you and you better get it right. It's God loves you and invites you to know Him, invites you to a better life walking with Him. And so the first week we talked about that idea that you accept that you're accepted. And then this past week we talked about the idea that life is actually better with company. That friendships were God's idea, that this is His concept, His idea that we would live life with other people, that we would walk through this with other people. We kind of tie all of our best experiences to experiences that we shared with others, right? We think of the best days of our life as days that we get permanent company, right? Wedding days, or days that we meet people that are significant to us, or days that we have a child. It's days that we get company forever. Days that people look at us and say, all right, till I'm dead. Right? My only escape will be if I die. That's when I'll leave you. Like this is kind of how we evaluate this, and we celebrate the idea that that was God's idea. That's how God designed it. And this week 3 of this, I'm extremely excited to share with you this idea, and it's going to seem a little cavalier at first, but don't miss what I hope that you'll see. Week 3 is this. The Better Life Part 3 is this. Life is better with a smile. Life is better with a smile. And I'm going to use this idea of smile because I think maybe it will stick with you a little better. I think but what I mean by that is joy. And we're talking about the concept of joy. We're talking about this idea that no matter what you face, you have reasons to smile in the midst of what you face. That joy is not circumstantial in the way that happiness is. Joy is not circumstantial in the way that we think that it is a lot of times. That we think happiness and joy come from good circumstances. Something good happens to me, so I'm happy. And the reality of the scriptures, the reality of life in general, is that that's not how that works. That there are, in fact, people with terrible circumstances who are still smiling. There are, in fact, people living in great pain and great distress, yet they still have some kind of joy that seems to exceed their experience. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to explore this incredibly important concept of perspective. When Jesus invites us to a better life, He invites us to begin seeing the world differently. You up for that? You excited for it? All right, I'm going to be in Matthew chapter 6. I'm only going to teach 2 verses of Scripture, and if you're brand new here, you'll learn quickly that I won't take forever for this. You won't get in the parking lot and say, I thought he was never going to shut up. No, I want to move through this quickly, get you the information that I think would be helpful for you, and then I want to have lunch. So I'm excited for that too. You excited for lunch? Brunch? You're going to try to make brunch today? Have you smiled yet today? Life's better with a smile. You want to try one on? Let me see a smile real quick. Yeah, some of those are pretty cheesy. All right. Some of you faked it, and then you accidentally kind of really smiled, which is kind of a cool concept. Verse 22 in Matthew chapter 6, your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, this is Jesus teaching to a group of people. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. So we're going to take a few moments today and unpack what Jesus actually teaches here, what he's actually saying here piece by piece. And as we look at these two short sentences, we're going to find 3 reasons to smile no matter what you see. Whenever you came in today, hopefully you got a worship guide. On the back of that worship guide, there's sermon notes. And those 3 sermon notes, I'm going to fill in those blanks for you as we move through this. But let's start at the beginning. Jesus says, first of all, your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. Now, here's what's interesting about that. Your eye is the only part of your body that experiences light at all, right? You can't hear it, smell it, taste it, or touch it. You may feel heat, but that's not light. That's heat, right? You only see light. So at the very start of this, we must admit Jesus has a pretty solid example to work from. The Son of God's not so bad at this teaching thing. When he tells these people standing around, I imagine a lot of people in Matthew chapter 6 taking a step back and thinking, it's a pretty good point. Your eye kind of is like a lamp. And this is before a lot of modern biological understanding, right? We kind of know how eyes work a little better, that the front of your eye is like a window, right? There's a lens that lets light through, and the light moves through your pupil, and your pupil can dilate and constrict. That's how your iris, I think your iris does that maybe. I don't know exactly how all this stuff works, but your iris gets bigger and your pupil gets smaller, and vice versa, to let the right amount of light in, to protect your retina. So your pupil lets light come through, the right amount of light, and that light gets projected onto your retina, and your retina translates that information by way of your optic nerve and sends the information to your brain and says, look what I see, right? That's how that works. I don't have a point to make. Just thought it was interesting. Just thought I would share with you so that if you're not into the Jesus thing, at least you learned a little bit of biological facts today. But Jesus knows this. Seriously, Jesus knows this, understands how it works, and it's worth noting that thousands of years before anyone else understands really how eyes work, that Jesus would stand up in front of a group of people and say, your eye actually is like a lamp. Like your eye's the only part of you that experiences light. It lets the light through. And then he goes on to make his point. And our first point is going to come from this. He says, your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. Jesus uses light and darkness as opposite ends of this sort of continuum of perspective, and that's how we're going to kind of look at it today, as light and darkness. And I'm not going to try to reconcile that. We can kind of get on board with that, right? That light is good and less light is bad. That's essentially, we can all kind of understand that. And so the first thing that I would show you in your sermon notes, another way of thinking of this first part of the verse here, when your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. Jesus says this, a good perspective brings a good experience. A good perspective brings a good experience, are the first blanks on your sermon notes. He's not saying that when your eye is healthy, then your whole body is healthy. We see that, right? He's just saying that this is the difference between Jesus' teachings on this and more of a New Age Jedi mind trick, think your way to health, wealth, and success kind of thing. Jesus isn't saying that. He's not saying if your eye is healthy, if your perspective is good, you will change your circumstances by how you see things. He's just saying if your eyes are healthy, your body will be filled with light. He's addressing perspective, not circumstance. Make sense? I would maybe say it this way, and this is a statement we can put on the screen. He's saying when your perspective is good, then your experience is good. Well, aren't some circumstances truly terrible, Drew? Aren't some things just really bad? And I would say, yes, they are. Some things are truly terrible, but they are still open to interpretation. That's all that Jesus is saying here. They can still be faced with a smile. Even extremely difficult, extremely painful things, we have seen people face extremely painful things with a smile. Can God change your circumstances? Well, of course he can. But what Jesus is showing here is that he doesn't have to in order for you to have joy. He doesn't have to address your circumstances in order for you to experience joy. He's teaching us about perspective. Does this make sense? Are we kind of tracking with it? It is not what you experience that changes your life. It is how you interpret what you experience. We all know this is true, right? Again, this isn't New Age. This isn't this, right? It is not what happens to us that shapes us. It's what we decide to do with that. This is what thousands of years of psychology have taught us. This is why you can't just do something to someone and know exactly what they'll do in return, right? There is no true cause and effect in the universe. We all have free will, and there's no way of predicting how people will react to things, and the same is true for us. Just because something happens to me doesn't mean that I have to become a certain type of person as a result of it. So the good news here, and this is a big deal. I hope you can lean into this. The good news here, the first reason to smile no matter what, is that you could walk out of here today with a better life and nothing about your circumstances even needs to change. Like, you don't have to have any new circumstances, any change in salary, change in job, change in location, nothing, change in health, change in family. Nothing has to change whatsoever, but you could change your perspective and begin to experience a better life. When your eye is healthy, and we can kind of parallel these things here. What Jesus says, when your eye is healthy, that is when your perspective is right, then your whole body, that is your life, is filled with light, which is to say it's better. Number 2, starting in verse 23, Jesus then goes to sort of flip the script. He says, but when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. So number 2 on your sermon notes, if you want to fill in those blanks there, is this: a poor perspective can ruin a good life. He flips the metaphor to show us that your eye can let in more light when it's needed, but your eye could also block the light and make things seem darker than they actually are, make things seem worse than they actually are. You've probably experienced this with your biological eye, with the way that your eye actually works. If you've been outside for a while, and on a very bright day, and then you come inside to an otherwise pretty well-lit room, you might find yourself, my daughter did this yesterday. We were outside playing in the yard and kicking a soccer ball around, and then we came back inside and turned on the lights, and she said, I can't see anything. Even though the lights were on, an otherwise pretty well-lit room, this is what happens. Whenever you're in light, your pupils constrict, so they're smaller, they're letting less light in, and then you could go into a room that is pretty well lit, but not as well lit as the room that you were in before or outside, and it takes your eyes a minute to adjust. Jesus is saying that bad eyes, when your eye is unhealthy eyes, are kind of like pupils that never dilate. Like that no matter what circumstance you're in, no matter what situation you're in, that it kind of seems like there's never quite enough light. There's never quite enough good going on. This is perhaps why sometimes we might look at other people's lives and think, if I had what they have, then I'd be happy. It's why some of us think that perhaps another season of our life was better than the present season, than the one we're in right now, right? That maybe we do this with the future and the past. We point back to a time and say, that was the good old days right there. That was the good stuff there. That's when I had a good experience. That's when I had a good life. Or we point ahead and say, that's when it's going to get good. And these are both tricks. They're both traps. They're both essentially unhealthy eyes, right? They're pupils that won't dilate. They won't let more light in. And we're constantly convinced that some other season is the better season. Some other experience is the better experience. This is why we often think that a change of circumstances will make us happier, only to discover that no matter what our circumstances, our experience is shaped by our perspective, not our circumstances. It's essentially the biblical expression of a discovery that no matter where you are, there you are, right? No matter where you go, there you are. No matter what changes about your circumstances, you're still the one experiencing your circumstances. And this is all that Jesus suggests here. And I would maybe suggest it this way. I would suggest that perhaps we don't need different lives. We need more light. Is it possible that what we truly need is a change of perspective more so than a change of circumstance? We're often convinced that better circumstances are all we need to be happy, and then we get those better circumstances, and we discover that the circumstances weren't the problem, that the problem ran deeper than the surface experience. Have you ever purchased anything from an infomercial? You're not going to admit it in front of all these people, are you? My wife did this once. Was it a ShamWow? Windshield Wonder. She bought the Windshield Wonder. It's kind of a funny story. She bought Windshield Wonder. She wanted one of them. And it took like 6 weeks before we ever heard back from QVC. And they called back and they said, good news, Mrs. Dunbar. We no longer sell the Windshield Wonder, but we do have the Windshield Wonder Mini. And we're going to send you 4 of those. So she ordered a product that she thought was going to help our windshield situation. And what she got instead were 4 miniature versions that were virtually useless. And I don't remember if they ever even showed up. They did? Okay, so we did eventually get them. But anyways, infomercials are becoming slightly less popular. Who knows? Probably because of customer service, as it turns out. But back in the late 90s and early 2000s, this was kind of a notorious, they were notorious for creating problems that you didn't know you had so they could solve them with a product, right? Come on, you have fallen for it. You have done it before. I know they would take some simple but perhaps time-consuming task like washing dishes, and they'd show you a video of someone who is so frustrated with washing dishes. Her life is falling apart all around her. It takes her like 15 minutes to wash the dishes after dinner, and then they show you next to that there's been this recent discovery of like a jungle tree sap that is perfect for getting bacon grease off of stainless steel. And this woman uses the new product, and it only takes her 90 seconds, and she's prettier, and her hair works better too. Like everything, the lighting is better for her. Everything is so much better in the second frame. And this is essentially how they work. This is what they know. What they know is that they can change your experience by changing your perspective, right? They create a problem for you. There's a formula for their sell. Essentially, change your perspective, convince you that something that you hadn't really thought of was a problem is now a major problem that has to be solved. That's how I feel like that first woman right there. That's how I feel every time I do the dishes. My hair won't sit right, and the lighting's bad, and the kids won't listen. If I had the jungle tree sap stuff, I bet that would change it. And this is how it works. This is how they're selling. We buy it. This is the power of a poor perspective. This is the power of an unhealthy eye. Things that aren't problems become problems. Things that aren't bad circumstances start to appear worse than they are, and things that are bad circumstances look even worse. Things that might actually be good start to seem less good. A poor perspective can ruin a good life, a good experience. Jesus knows this, and he wants us to see it. It's part of the better life is recognizing it. And then thirdly, and this is where Jesus lands, and I hope this doesn't appear heavy, but this is where he goes next. He recognizes the need to address something that could possibly happen in a room like this, and in a room full of people like us as we start to consider this. Jesus says, Finishing up verse 23, and if the light you think you have is darkness, how deep that darkness is. The third part of your sermon notes, I would say it this way if you want to fill in these blanks. It's ignoring a poor perspective is dangerous. The way that Jesus ends this teaching for us is by pointing back to the nature of the gospel in general, right? This is always the case with the gospel. The only people who can't be helped are people who won't admit that they need help. Right? No one is too far gone for God to save. No one's sin is too great for Jesus to forgive it. And no one's pessimism, negativity, poor perspective is beyond repair, except those in denial. Except those who would insist, I don't have a perspective problem, I have a circumstance problem. Jesus knows this. He addresses it. He says, I know. As he's teaching these people, I know. Some of you are going to think, it's not a perspective problem, Drew. And you are the ones in perhaps the most danger. You are perhaps at the greatest risk. The better life is the furthest from those of you who wouldn't say, well, maybe I do have a poor perspective. Maybe I am not seeing the good in these things. Jesus ends his parable with a warning that those in the deepest darkness are those whose perspective is negative, pessimistic, poor, anxious, fearful, and who think they're being positive. Those who won't admit that perhaps they have a problem with their eyes are those whose better life is the most in jeopardy. We've already talked about how a poor perspective can ruin an otherwise good experience or good life, but Jesus takes it a step further and says many people live without ever even noticing that they've got a poor perspective. They're convinced this doesn't apply to them. And if you're in here today and you would say, Drew, I don't have a perspective problem. I have a circumstance problem. Like if you would say, Drew, you don't know my problem. You don't know my pain. You don't know my experience. You don't know what I'm going through. I would encourage you to consider that perhaps Jesus' closing words are in fact for you. If that's been your gut reaction, the whole message, the whole time is that won't work, that won't work, that won't work. Jesus addresses it. He says, hey, by the way, if you say that won't work, you're probably the one in the most danger. You're probably the one who needs to lean in the most. And you're right about me. I get that. We're brand new in our friendship together. Right? You're right. I don't know. I don't know you. I don't know your experience. I don't know your pain. I don't know pain at all. Right? I'm just a middle-class kid from West Virginia who's basically had everything handed to me, right? I went to college and got a degree and didn't have any debt after that and was given a car and was given a place to live and married a wonderful, fantastic woman that I absolutely do not deserve and was given the thick, wavy hair of an English prince, right? I get that. I get that you might look at me and say, Drew, you don't know anything about pain. You're right. You're right. But I didn't say it. This isn't my perspective I'm giving you here. This isn't my idea. These aren't my teachings. This is what Jesus says is true. And Jesus was born into controversy and conflict. I don't know what you might know or not know about the life of Jesus, but his mother, Mary, became pregnant with him as a teenager outside of wedlock in a culture that seriously frowned on that kind of thing. And many of them never really quite bought the story that this is God's child. Many of the young boys of Jesus' generation, thousands of young boys of Jesus' generation, were murdered by the government before they were 5 years old. There was great fear in Caesar's eyes. He had heard that a Messiah was coming, that there was this God-King Messiah who was coming, who would be the new king of the Jews. And so he said, well, we got to kill every Jewish boy. And so that happened to Jesus' generation. He was then thrust into a system, Jesus thrust into a system where he was overtaxed, where he was forced to serve like a slave whenever they asked this of him. He was mistreated because of his heritage, insulted because of where he was from. Right? There's moments in the scriptures where they say, well, he can't possibly be anything good. He's from Nazareth. And we don't fully understand that. Nazareth sounds as good of a place to be from as anywhere else. But in his culture, this is the slums. He's looked down upon because of where he's from. And Jesus was eventually betrayed by everyone he ever knew and trusted. The people who said, I'll never turn my back on you, they turned their back on him. He was betrayed by a kiss from one of his friends. One of his friends greeted him with a sign of friendship as a way, as a symbol to the people who were going to take him captive. And everyone turned their back on Jesus. And then he's beaten and murdered for crimes that he didn't commit by the time he reaches early adulthood. This is the story of Jesus Christ. And he's the one who says, it's all a matter of perspective. Not me. Not my idea, not my teaching. I'm not sure I would have come up with that. I'm not sure that's the message I would have given you today. If it were really my call, if I just wanted to tell you how to make your life better, I might come in here and teach you how to balance a budget or show you something more like that. But Jesus, the one who truly knows pain, the one who truly knows our experience better than we know us, the one who made us, the one who made the world that we live in, the one who loves us, he says, actually, it's all a matter of perspective. You get your perspective right, and you can take on just about anything. You find some reasons to smile no matter what you see, and you can take on just about anything. You find some strength and some courage and some joy and some peace no matter what your circumstances, and you can't be stopped. That's what Jesus teaches, and he's actually got a place to speak from on this. The last blanks on your sermon notes were, it's all a matter of perspective, because that's the statement that I want you walking out of here with. That's the statement that I want to stick with you. That's the statement that I would hope that tomorrow morning, when you kind of forget this, or this starts to fade, or maybe you feel a little more courageous right now, a little more bold right now, you feel a little better about your circumstances because you're thinking nothing even has to change, I can have a better life. And then Monday comes, and it feels like life isn't that much better. That you would be able to call on something and say, you know what, though, it is a matter of perspective. Jesus himself said, it is all a matter of perspective.